You've seen pictures of this vehicle on the internet, taken all around the country. Now let me tell you about the man behind the Lennonmurdertruth van. Steve Lightfoot was born on March 1st, 1954 in Helena, Montana. He is the oldest of 4 children, and his family moved to California when he was 4. He was an aspiring pro golfer and golf course architect, until he got sidelined by discovering that John Lennon's murder was an act of the US government. And of course, Stephen King. On July 26, 1982, Lightfoot's life would change forever. He was perusing the December 15th, 1980 news clippings from Time, Newsweek, and US News magazines at the Pacific Beach Public Library, trying to find out what happened to Mark David Chapman after he pleaded guilty behind closed doors. He says he already knew John Lennon's assassination was done by powerful forces, citing that President Nixon had wanted John Lennon dead over his peace activism alone. Lightfoot noticed there were no murder reports in the December 8th issues of his magazines. He also noticed that the magazine's bold print headlines were slapping him around as if they were government codes all about the behind-the-scenes activity regarding the government's role in the murder, specifically Nixon and Reagan's roles. The headline that read, "Who's in, who's out," from Time, struck him the most. He thought, Reagan's in, Lennon's out. The subheader read, "Fitting together pieces of a complicated jigsaw puzzle." Lightfoot noticed how Nixon's book, The Real War, was positioned next to Reagan in the picture that went with the headline. There was spooky code behavior in Newsweek's headlines as well. Lightfoot found a copy of The Real War and, by chance, flipped to the page that mentioned rock stars, spouting, "Peace is good, war is bad," and "must be removed from the stage of public debate by whatever means are needed." And he'd read just a few minutes earlier in US Magazine about how Nixon tried to deport John and Yoko and how John felt his life was in danger. Lightfoot became nauseous at the weight of what he'd just discovered. A month later, he discovered the words Mark David and Chapman attached to a letter to the editor in US News 3 weeks before the murder, in which Chapman explains how Reagan is moving him armed into a hostile square. By now, you're probably wondering where Stephen King comes in all of this. The answer is now. Lightfoot was rolling through his microfiche backwards into September of 1980, and a face rolled by him, and he knew from the headline it was the killer. Stephen King, one great big Zippo lighter. There was an article about an interview with King about his book Firestarter, with an image of Stephen King in the thumbnail. Lightfoot decided King looked a lot like Chapman in the autograph photo. Chapman, as depicted in the other photos, did not match the other photo of the killer. Lightfoot's brother asked him if he'd read the article about King. The answer was no, but he swiftly changed that. At that point, I knew how ridiculous the truth must sound to the world. Stephen King, the Stephen King of horror novel and movie fame, is the real killer of John Lennon. Chapman is an lookalike decoy. Period. My first reaction was dread. Who will ever believe all this? Oh, Nixon, you genius, you master criminal of the world. You've really committed a crime here. Who will believe it no matter the evidence? Well, I bought Lightfoot's book, so you don't have to. It's split into 5 poorly defined categories. There's content from each of the categories, but I had to do a lot of sorting out because the book is very disorganized. I also added a few categories because some of them were too long. Here we go. 1. The condensed version of the bold print codes in Time, Newsweek, and US News and World Report magazine. Lightfoot's headline codes refer to bold print titles and subtitles in certain issues of Newsweek, Time, and US News magazines, whose headlines allegedly plug into the murder in addition to whatever they're supposed to mean. Before I begin this section, I would like to give a disclaimer. Lightfoot does not do a very good job explaining how his codes connect to the murder. He pretty much just presents them. Lightfoot's favorite headline clue is, "Who's in, who's out?" which means Reagan's in, Lennon's out. I pretty much covered all of this one in the intro already. After this brief introduction, he goes on to yap about the real war on the next page and then continues talking about his codes on the page after that. The next codes come from December 8th Newsweek magazine on pages 30 and 31. I actually found a video of him reading this one. No, he doesn't really explain it, but I'll let him read it to you.
Under the December 8th, 1982 of Newsweek, we found this consecutive string of full-print codes.
Towards the end of the book, there's a page titled Text of the Bold Print Codes, but again, he does not explain them substantially.
All President's magazines, positivity and anger, the real John Lennon, thinking about John Lennon, the little things, all under attack, just the thing that you thought, the corporate thing, everything, all the
For a few of the headline codes, he likens them to Beatles songs. For example, How It Can Be Told, See How They Change. Lady Madonna lyric, See How They Run. Goodbye to all that. The taxman comes to Publishers Row. Taxman and paperback writer. But wait, there's more! Lightfoot did a really shitty job explaining his codes in his book. But I found a podcast where he actually does explain some of them a little bit.
And you said 75% of those are doing what? They're pointing to...
Well, let me just read you off a sampling of some of the more graphic examples. This is double meaning innuendo. In other words, while caught in the crossfire might be about something not related to John Lennon's murder, the fact that John Lennon was caught in the crossfire of bullets makes this a double meaning message. Similarly, Johnny Comes Marching Home, thinking about John Lennon, war, peace, and politics.
What are these words that you're speaking to me?
These are bold print messages in the issues of Time and Newsweek surrounding the murder of John Lennon.
And these are sentences or these headlines?
Headlines only.
These are headlines.
In other words, I found out that the military and the intelligentsia, actually the best codes of all are found in Time and Newsweek's bold print, where our government and the CIA and the KGB and the entire world order have been documenting secrets behind our backs as if we're too stupid to notice the obviousness of these messages slapping us in the face.
That's pretty much the best explanation I found. 2. The Real War. In Lightfoot's book, he has excerpts from 7 different pages in The Real War, which he claimed relate to Lennon. I'm not going to read them all, but I'll show them on the screen while I say what I make out of them. John Lennon is not named, but is inferred to as a trendy. Celebrities, over-glamorized dilettantes who posture the latest idea. The latest idea, including but not limited to protesting and anti-war beliefs. Trendies are further described by Nixon as seeing bad only from the right but not from the left, having been created by the media and having become the new power elite in charge of what's depicted as good and bad on hundreds of millions of TVs. Nixon says that if in a less hazardous age, America could afford to indulge in the prancing of the trendy. Trendies are discussed and defined around page 238 through 243. Lightfoot then brings in a quote from page 7, claiming it's also from page 243. The quote from page 7 reads, "For will to be effective, it must necessarily include the readiness to sacrifice if necessary, to defer those goals that are merely desirable in order to advance those that are essential, to pay the cost of defense, to incur risks, to incur the displeasure of powerful constituencies at home and of raucous voices abroad." I presume this is a quote that Lightfoot interprets as Nixon believing Lennon should be executed. 3. The killer's alleged name and letter printed before the murder. Next comes page 4 from U.S. News November 24th, 1980 issue. It contains quotes of individuals' reactions to Reagan winning the election, including one from Corporal Roger Chapman, who said that Reagan could move him to a hostile square, but more importantly, he said the word Mark. There's also a quote from a man named David. Lightfoot alleges that because the words Mark, David, and Chapman all appear on the page, Mark David Chapman is related to the article, and Lightfoot even believes those words belonged to MDC. 4. The killer's face and true identity printed 2 and 3 months before the murder. On September 15th, 1980, a review on Stephen King's book, Firestarter, was published. Attached was an image of Stephen King, and he resembled the man in Paul Gorish's famous photo of Mark David Chapman getting Lennon's photograph. Below the image read, Stephen King, one great big Zippo lighter, which, according to Lightfoot, describes the scene of the crime, a man at night with a gun blazing. Firestarter is about a couple who volunteered to be injected with a powerful, hypnotic, hallucinogenic drug for a government experiment. The wife, Vicky, develops telekinesis, and the husband, Andy, develops mind control abilities. Their child, the protagonist, has powers to heat things up to 30,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hence the title Firestarter, and reference to Zippo lighters. The government, having created powerful genetic mutations in Vicky and Andy, wanted to eliminate them, just like Nixon and Reagan wanted to eliminate John Lennon. In Lightfoot's canon, Paul Gorish, John Lennon's stantographer who took many famous photos of him, including the autograph photo, is a government photographer engaged in the cover-up. The autograph photo was planned in advance by the media brainwash campaign. Chapman is a decoy lookalike of Stephen King, who was waiting in the police station while King murdered John Lennon. The police on the scene arrested King, who was sitting reading The Catcher in the Rye nearby.
I need to read that book. No, I have not read it. So
King was led away with a police overcoat covering his face and then switched inside, where Chapman gave his filmed, rehearsed confession. 5. The writings of Stephen King, including his handwritten letters and verbal confessions. 5.1. Books. On the 15th page of Lightfoot's book, he shares a lot of excerpts from King's writing which relate to Lennon's assassination. In fact, almost all of Stephen King's work exhibits themes and images that relate to the murder. This goes on for about 4 8.5 by 11 single-spaced pages. I'll read a few excerpts that stood out to me. Pause to read them all. Salem's Lot, page 264. Corey walked out into the living room ahead of Reggie, staggering a little. His legs were rubber. A patch between his shoulder blades began to itch insanely. That's where he's gonna put it. The bullet. He thought, right between the shoulder blades. I wonder if I'll live long enough to see my guts hit the wall. I didn't read the whole book, but at least in this passage, Corey was not shot in the back, nor was he shot at all. He had an affair with Reggie's wife, so Reggie shoved his double-barreled gun into Corey's mouth. It was unloaded, but psychological torture nonetheless. The wife did not appreciate it. My understanding is that Corey and Reggie are merely secondary characters. The next book Lightfoot excerpts is The Dead Zone. It's about a man named Johnny who gains psychic powers after a car accident. After the accident, he has frequent visions and headaches, but is determined to resume his job as a teacher. With his psychic powers, he helped solve a murder case which was heavily publicized, making him so famous and controversial that he was fired from his teaching job. After being fired, he became interested in politics and met a man named Greg Stilson. He foresaw Stilson as president-turned-dictator, starting a nuclear world war. The FBI was investigating Stilson, but after the lead investigator was killed in a car bomb, Johnny took it as his duty to take out Stilson. He tried to snipe, but missed, but Stilson picked up a child to use as a human shield, and that went viral and ended his political career. Page 64, regarding the murder Johnny helped solve. The killer was slick. He sat on a bench in the town park near bandstand, smoking a Marlboro and humming a song from the Beatles' White Album. I'm back in the USSR. Page 255, says Johnny. Yes, I saw it in the Newsweek article. That picture of me is from the press conference, only cropped. I included this quote because a lot of Lightfoot's evidence comes from Newsweek. Page 256. Johnny is fired from his job as a teacher for being too controversial. Quote, there was a special meeting of the school board last evening and they voted 5-2 to ask your contract be withdrawn. The reason? You're too controversial to be effective as a teacher. I came very close to tendering my own resignation. I was that disgusted. If it weren't for Maureen and the kids, I think I would have. This abortion isn't even on par with tossing Rabbit Run or Catcher in the Rye out of the classroom. This isn't the only time in The Dead Zone that the Catcher in the Rye was referenced. Towards the end of the book, 3 ladies chat among themselves while filing into Stilson's rally where Johnny is about to try to assassinate Stilson. One of them says she's hoping to get an autograph. Unlike with Lennon's assassination, the autographee was not also the shooter. The next novel Lightfoot mentions is Different Seasons, published in 1982, which also mentions the Beatles. Page 60. In Washington, President Kennedy was promising a fresh assault on poverty and on civil rights inequalities, not knowing he had only half a year to live. In Liverpool, a musical group called the Beatles was emerging as a force to be reckoned with, but I guess that no one stateside had yet heard of them. Then, on page 500 in the afterword, King talking in his own voice. He mentions Lennon's death, and I went down to New York from Maine to celebrate the publication of Carrie, April 1974. Friends and neighbors. Lennon was alive, Nixon was still hanging in there as president. 5.2. Interviews with King. After sharing Stephen King's book quotes, Lightfoot gives out-of-context excerpts from a 1983 Playboy interview with King. I found the original interview and brought context back when it fit. Question. How does it feel to be in a Playboy interview? Answer. It feels great. I love it. And sure, it's an ego boost to think that I'll be the subject of one of your interviews with my name in black bold print. And those 3 mugshots crawling along the bottom of the page on top of the quotes where I really fucked up and put my foot in my mouth. Black bold print must be a reference to the bold print codes. His answer to the next question shocked me a little bit. The question was, where do you think you'd be today without your writing talent? Answer. I might very well have ended up there in the Texas Tower with Charlie Whitman, working out my demons with a high-powered telescopic rifle instead of a word processor. Charlie Whitman murdered his mother and wife in their homes before shooting 3 people in the University of Texas Austin main building, before climbing to the 28th floor of the clock tower and indiscriminately firing multiple rifles, killing another 11 people and injuring 31. So Stephen King pretty much said he'd have been a mass shooter had he not been a writer. I don't know the context, if he said that jokingly or anything, but it's still alarming. Now, here King is talking about rock and roll. Question. You also seem intrigued by the phenomenon of Nazism and have written about it at length. Answer. Well, The nature of evil is a natural preoccupation for any horror writer, and Nazism is probably the most dramatic incarnation of that evil. But when it exploded onto the German scene in the 1920s, I could see how it exercised a dangerously compelling appeal. That werewolf in us is never far from the surface, and Hitler knew how to unleash and feed it. But you can see the echoes of the mad Dionysian engine that powered the Nazis all around you. For example, I'm a big rock and roll fan, and rock has been an important influence on my life and work. But even there you can sometimes hear that beast rattling its chains and struggling to get loose. Nothing so dramatic as Altamont either, just the kind of wild, frenzied mob emotions that can be generated when you get a couple thousand people blasted out of their skulls on sound and dope in an auditorium. He gives an example of when he was at a Bruce Springsteen concert and Springsteen pumped his fist in the air fascistically. The audience mindlessly followed. King said it felt like he was in Nuremberg, though he knew Springsteen was harmless. Other things King said in the interview include, "Death as a concept and the people who dealt out death always intrigued me," and "Writing is necessary for my sanity. All the rage and hate and frustration, all that's dangerous and foul and sick within me, I'm able to spew out into my work." And, just as Garfield says, "Lasagna is my life." I can say, in all truth, that horror is mine. I'd write the stuff even if I weren't paid for it, because I don't think there's anything sweeter on God's green earth than scaring the living shit out of people. Question: how far will you go to get the desired effect? Answer: as far as I have to go, until the reader becomes convinced they're in the hands of a genuine, gibbering, certified homicidal maniac. 5.3. Letters. In late July of 1984, Lightfoot received a letter signed Dennis C. Lee. Amazingly, it seems to be the same handwriting as Stephen King's letter to me in September of 1992. The first letter from Dennis C. Lee is a threat letter and an admission of his guilt. 2 weeks after receiving this first letter, my father was killed in a small plane crash on the anniversary of Nixon's resignation.
Now that handwriting, Jack Stein, what do you know? It matches another letter he sent me 8 years earlier, where he says, "You haven't got the whole story yet, Mr. Lightfoot, but since you won't cease your investigation, I thought I may as well clue you to phase 3. And then 2 weeks later, my dad dies in a plane crash on the 10th anniversary of Nixon's resignation, 2 weeks after his dog is first found hanged in his drape cord."
The second letter, hand-delivered by a friend to me in Bangor, Maine, is a threat letter and a bribery attempt, as the letter was on the inside flap of a book titled "Let Me Take You Down" about Chapman. The bribery attempt is that the bookmark was placed on the following page and passage, complete with a smudge mark. The letter from Stephen King reads, "Dear Steve, I didn't kill John Lennon, and I think you know that as well as I do, inside the wall of denial you've put up. Your interest in me is a way of allowing you to avoid dealing with your own mental and spiritual problems. Let it go, why don't you, and find more constructive things to do for your illegible talents? Meantime, how is a fascinating book about the man who really did kill John Lennon? Best, Stephen King." Lightfoot says King never denied killing John Lennon, but it seems he pretty clearly denied killing John Lennon in the first sentence of that letter. Lightfoot, however, voids that, because the end of the letter says, "The man who really did kill John Lennon, Stephen King." These letters are all on the back cover of the book. The book pretty much ends abruptly, but don't worry, there's still more. Time for the categories I added. 6. Other things from his website, like Yoko and Paul. 6.1. Paul. Lightfoot says Paul McCartney acknowledged him in his concert in Berkeley in 1990 during the instrumental in Fool on the Hill on April Fool's Day. In Berkeley, 1990, there were 2 concerts, and there's a video from March 31st, 1990. Steve says Paul said, "Yeah, Steve! That's right. I don't know what you think, Berkeley, but I want you to know that we like it, and we need you as a people to get to the promised land." It's possible that Paul said something different in the second show, but what I heard in the recording of the first show is very different from what Steve heard.
I see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I have a dream this afternoon. We
Steve says he taped the show he went to, but the video isn't on his website. I was close to the stage and, except for hearing it days later on my tape recording of it, I'd have missed it entirely. Linda, his wife, looked sad for Paul, knowing it was a joke half-effort. She died a few years later to serve him right. Had it been Lennon avenging Paul, he'd have announced who we were ignoring, me, and that he would not leave the stage until we protested to get this evidence in the news. But John was a real man. Should I just make a whole video reacting to this guy? Even Paul McCartney has been exposed as the fair-weather friend and bag of was he apparently is, just like all of celebrityhood and even my own family members who are also hypocrites. Of course, Yoko is a government bitch who still babysits the cover-up in New York like the Judas
I don't believe you.
cunt that she is. And the US media is too cowardly to do their job, partly because the CIA has taken over the media. Of course, you all may think this to be a little rich and over the top, but it is not. I am the messenger. 6.2. Yoko. According to Lightfoot, Yoko identified herself as my enemy in 1987 when she ordered me handcuffed, kidnapped, and pistol-whipped unconscious in San Francisco. Lightfoot was arrested for attending a Stephen King book signing, holding a large billboard and blocking the sidewalk. The billboard read, "Stephen King is a murderer. It's true or he'd sue." Well, first he said he was arrested for being an unwelcome guest at a Stephen King book signing. But then he said he was arrested for trying to get Yoko his evidence. In fact, Yoko ordered her security detail in San Francisco in October of 1987 to kidnap, handcuff, and pistol whip me unconscious for daring to give her my evidence to get to the surviving Beatles then. It was at an art gallery, the same venue where she met John. That's how I found out she was part of the plot from even before she met John. That's how afraid the government was of John. They sent an agent to marry him and control him as much as she could. Even had her break up the Beatles deliberately. Well, John and Yoko did not meet in San Francisco. They met in London. So this doesn't quite add up. Anyways, 6.3. Steve is fucking insane. Lightfoot says you can see his mugshot in satellite images of Washington State. Steve Lightfoot doesn't quite think he's the next coming of Jesus Christ, but
I am, however, in a class with Martin Luther King Jr., John and Robert Kennedy, Gandhi and John Lennon, and others who changed the course of history. And
he shows his shit to kids, too.
if you show Stephen King's face next to the man accused of being Mark David Chapman getting John Lennon's autograph, all young children go, "Oh my God, it's him!"
And you'll never guess who he voted for. Hey, John. Who's in the bathroom just below the stairs?
There's matches in the bathroom just below the stairs.
Oh my gosh, it's Steve Lightfoot? I could go on and on about how I believe the Jews' own race supremacy practices and inbreeding has caused their genetics to go berserk and evil. Before I was born, the Jews were kicked out of every area they ever tried to settle in. There must have been a reason. At one point, their genetic pool was targeted by Hitler. He was so sure they were secretly meddling in all our lives. Now, what does Lightfoot think of the LGBTQ community? Incidentally, homosexuals, over time, have come out of the woodwork to let me know they resent my heroism and activism regarding Lennon's murder more than any other demographic. It's the #1 reason I took my expose out of California. In fact, they're bad, not mine. I'm just the messenger. In fact, I am so sure of this that I feel homosexuals should not be allowed to be in positions of power that involve social morals. Anyways, his new developments page is super long. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And here I have some out-of-context quotes from the interview I found.
And Lennon's dead. That's how they literally castrated the people of America and the world.
So
You were raped by the devil. When Stephen King killed John Lennon, you were kidnapped by barbarians. You were raped by Satan. And now you are traumatized. You don't want to press charges. You just want to sulk and be miserable. The things you want to suck the government's tit, and you're going to have to jail Stephen King. Because if you don't jail Stephen King for killing John Lennon, you deserve all the hell that the universe gives you.
But if we jail Stephen King, then the universe will be right.
You will have better orgasms. Your kids will stop shooting themselves. You will stop taking ibuprofen or whatever damn drugs you're killing yourself with these days, you will stop it because you will have your pride back, your sanity back.
I think I have lost my pride and sanity. In conclusion, the Lennon Murder Truth van belongs to a demented, lonely Beatles fan and Stephen King hater. He's become an angry, pathetic hermit full of hatred and bigotry who lives in a van and drives around the contiguous United States, spreading his evidence. He currently lives in Colorado. His core pillars of evidence are bold print headline codes in magazines surrounding the time of the murder, that a young Stephen King resembled Chapman and is a horror writer, that Nixon tried to deport Lennon and wrote concerning things in his Reagan-endorsed book, and that Stephen King sent him letters and his dad died 2 weeks after the first one. He sings from his website van to show the world, hey, he's pretty good. Maybe he's not so crazy after all. He much prefers singing to other forms of work and plans to pick off where Lennon left off someday.
You look like Linda Blair projectile vomiting when you call me crazy.